Matt, as you know, Pixical is new. It finding its place in extracurricular programming, but we also felt that there was a lot of important things that we could introduce to students and to understand that they could use their passion and their pursuit in music and in piano for greater good. And we're still finding our footing, but we hope to be able to invite you again back, Dr. Claiborne, because from everything that I've read about your work, it's just been truly, truly inspiring. Dr. Claiborne is a professor at University of District Columbia. She earned her degrees from University of Michigan and the Manhattan School of Music. She is an incredible champion of music by Black composers. She has won many awards and accolades in her research. She is so well respected within the community, and she is now serving on the editorial board of the MTNA Music Teachers National Association and is about to begin as the column editor of the first ever diversity, equity, and inclusion column of the American Music Teacher. That is really spectacular. And when we think about these times and the political climate and just everyday climate of this world, I just commend you for this important work that you are doing for all of us. And for those of you who are just joining us now, if you could turn off your cameras, that would be wonderful, because it's an intimate group and we can try to have this workshop kind of as a dialogue and invite you to ask questions as we go along. Nakisha, if you could turn on your camera, wonderful. And also you may also rename yourself and put in parentheses where you're zooming in from. And I'm just going to give everyone an opportunity to introduce themselves because we have that opportunity to do so. So let's just start with Shane.
Hi, I'm Shane Cooper. I'm 13, and I'm from Oregon.
Awesome. How about Zach? We'd love to hear from you. You're on mute.
I'm just renaming adding the place. Okay. I'm Zach. I'm 20, I guess. I just turned 20 like last week, and then I'm from California.
Wonderful. And you're a pianist?
Yeah.
Wonderful. I think you're sitting on a piano. Great. And Nakisha, where are you zooming in from us? And tell us a little bit about yourself.
My name is Mason. I'm using my mom's computer, so it says Nakisha. But I'm from Virginia.
Okay, so you're just in our neck of the woods. Dr. Claiborne's in DC. Where in Virginia are you from?
I'm in Alexandria, but in the next month, I'm going to be moving to Fairfax.
Okay. Yay! Nice to see you. And Joe, for everyone, could you say a few words about yourself as well?
Oh, hey, everybody. I'm Joe. I live kind of near Seattle, and that's in the Pacific Northwest. And I really like piano. I like to play it. I like to teach it. It's really fun. Nice to meet you guys.
Wonderful. And so without further ado, Dr. Claiborne, take it away.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chang. I have to tell you, I am so excited just to be sharing with you all today and really just to get to know you. I love teaching. Everything about me, I love teaching because it's about sharing, right? It's about sharing our hearts, our talents, our music. And what I want to do today is get to know each of you. I'm actually really glad it's a little bit of a smaller group, because that means we can really have perhaps some challenging dialogues, but then also start thinking about what is your role as a pianist, right? What do you want to say about your music, and every time you step on the stage, what do you want the audience to remember about you? And then also thinking about how do all of those aspects actually empower us to think of ourselves as being activists or advocates, okay? So I want to make sure I have all of your names correct first. So we have Shane, we have Zach, and we have Mason, and we know we have Joe. Joe might help me out a little bit later too. Did I pronounce everyone's name correctly? You can just give me a thumbs up. Yes, okay. Zach, did I
Great.
get your name?
And we also have Natalie now who has joined us
Oh, okay.
and who is off screen, just FYI, so you know. She's just going to be listening.
Perfect. And I know Natalie as well. It's so good to see you, Natalie. Okay, perfect. Give me 1 second and I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started. Can you also give me a thumbs up? Is everyone near a piano by chance? I saw Zach is, oh, perfect. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Okay, this is going to be so much fun. I'm excited. Okay, so like I said, I kind of just played around with the title. I don't, words are very tricky, right? Because words give so much power to what we do. But I think that's such a great thing too, right? We're all probably familiar with the Black Lives Matter movement, right? And so I wanted to talk about this political movement and how that is actually deeply embedded in piano, in our piano studies, whether you're just starting out piano lessons, whether you want to pursue piano as a major. I want you all to start thinking critically about everything that we've learned from the middle C to the first composer we ever started learning, and following through your journey. What is the political statement that we're making when we approach the piano and when we share our music with other people? Let me see. Okay, can we all go to the chat? And I want in the next 30 seconds, as quickly as possible, can you name some of your favorite classical composers? Just don't think about, just as quickly as you can. Shane, I see you doing this. You don't have to think about it, just start listing. And I want to take a look at the chat. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds, just as fast as possible. It's okay if there are some repeats. Let me go to the chat. About 20 more seconds. As fast as possible. Okay. So I'm going to stop there. So we have Brahms. Oh my goodness, I love Brahms. Thank you, Shane. So we have Brahms, we have Fauré, we have Liszt, Rachmaninoff, Chopin, Gershwin, Bartók. Very nice. Bartók. We have Rodgers and Hammerstein. Oh, fantastic. It's musical theater. It's Schubert, Bach, two votes for Bach. That's okay. 3 votes for Bach. Okay. And then we have Joe. Joe, we have Florence Price, absolutely, Bach and Ravel. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So when we think about this list, take a look at all of these composers, except for one composer, except for who Joe wrote down, Florence Price, who we're going to talk about. What do you notice about all of these composers? What's something that you notice? How about you, Zach? What do you notice about these composers?
White males.
White males, that's true. White males, what else?
A lot of them are dead,
Yeah,
are not living.
they're not living, right? Isn't that crazy? Think of it this way. This is what I always like to do when I start some of my classes. I say, list all the composers, right? And then I say, A, were they dead? Every last one of them were dead. B, were they male? Were they white? Or heaven forbid, Were they all of the above, right? So what does that tell us? What does that tell us about classical music, right? What does it tell us? Perhaps it's telling us, or is it challenging us to think that sometimes we think about classical music as being something of the past, right? Something where the people who have contributed the most are no longer living. The people who we honor and kind of worship and idolize, they're all male. The people that our teachers continuously give us to study, they're all white, right? So what all this is to say, this is really, whether we think about it or not, it really creates a picture of what we think classical music should look and sound like, right? So whenever someone's asking you name something really quickly, we're not trying to think about the outliers. We're just thinking about quickly, what do I know about this subject? And you all gave great examples, but all of those examples, except one, fit into this notion, right? Now, there's nothing wrong with that. All of these composers are absolutely fantastic, right? And they're so fantastic that I wonder, could I put somebody on the spot just for like 2 minutes? Do any of you have any examples of, who do we list? We had Rachmaninoff, we had Chopin, we had Fauré, we had Liszt. Do any of you have some musical examples, maybe just 1 minute or 2 minutes of one of those composers who you could play at your piano? I see you, Shane, going back and forth. Do you have one of those composers who you've?
Not really. I don't really play classical. I play jazz.
Oh, that's not even better. All music is great, but I'm so excited to hear that. That's really exciting to hear. What about, does anyone have any, these quote unquote classical composers? Zach, I see you kind of raising your hand.
I haven't warmed up at all. I woke up not that long ago, so
That's okay. That's totally fine. But there's no judgment here. I would just love to
the
get
whole thing, or like what?
No, not at all. Maybe just like 30 seconds, just to get the sound in our ears, just to get our sound in our ears of this, what we're defining as classical composer. Anything at all.
Okay, I'm playing a Bach prelude, prelude number 5. Shoot, sorry, that's my dog's.
Your dog is excited about the prelude.
Yeah,
That's what I think is happening.
Book 5 prelude, book 2 prelude number 5 D major.
Fantastic. Yeah, you can just play, even just a small portion of it. Good. Zach, can we stop you there? That's fantastic. That's better than I could do. If he says you're just waking up. My goodness, my fingers probably wouldn't even move that well. Definitely not my left-hand scale passages work. But that's fantastic. So let me ask everyone, when you hear this music, what is your first reaction? Anytime we listen to music, we have it stirs a feeling within us, right? It stirs feelings and emotions. When you listen to this, what do you think about? We know it's by Bach. So how about Mason? When you hear that, what do you think about?
Honestly, nothing really.
Nothing. That's okay. And you know what? I say that's okay because what that actually tells me is that perhaps there's a disconnect, right? Right? Perhaps, and that goes back to this area here. These are dead people. These are dead people, and we are living, we are here in the flesh, right? And we're constantly studying music. I love Bach. First of all, I absolutely love Bach. But perhaps what it's telling us is that the music, it's not as relevant, or it's very hard for the average person to relate to the music. That doesn't mean that they can't. It means that it takes extra work, whether that's your homework, your background, all of these other things to help us to really understand it a bit more, right? So that's a fantastic and honest answer. I really appreciate that. Zach, you, however, have studied Bach, right? So you know the history, you know about Bach's instrument. Perhaps you know about D major being this triumphant, affect of the key. What are some things that you think about when you hear this music? Or when you're playing the music, I should say, so brilliantly.
Sorry, one sec. Hi. Hi. All right. Sorry.
That's okay.
I mean, my gut reaction is just kind of like, I do have like an emotional response to it.
Yeah.
Like I don't know, like this piece is very like jovial and very especially when I'm playing it, I'm trying to like feel how that affects my like how I'm like going up like those like how I'm like going up those scales, or how I'm like crescendoing, or like how I'm like choosing whether do I go like tenuto, staccato.
Not all of your
But
articulation.
it's like it's very but like my gut reaction, I guess, that kind of, I don't know, I'm kind of rambling at this point. It's very
Oh, you're not rambling, you're making perfect sense. What I'm hearing is that it makes you feel joyous, right?
Yeah.
And you want to bring out all these different types of articulations to help the audience feel what you're feeling, essentially, right? Would that be art? Like, would that be?
Yeah, but if I'm listening to Bach, I also kind of like, after a little bit, I feel like this might be for most music, even like modern music, but like I also start like thinking like very like analytically, especially if it's like a fugue or something like that. Like I'm like, oh, like what's the motif, and like where, like which voice is it being like voiced in, and like stuff like that.
Absolutely. That's because all of you here are fantastic pianists. You are fantastic musicians. So when we listen to something, it not only sparks the emotional part, but it the analytical part as well, because we want to dive into and say, how is this working, right? All these are fabulous. All these are fabulous. Now, just like what Zach said, with this music, it brings forth some type of emotion. Perhaps we know like the historical background as well, right? There's one composer, and I want you to start jotting some of these composers down if you have a notebook or something, because I want you to continue doing this investigative work, right? So one composer, I love quotes. I have a wall in my house that's just full of quotes of people that I admire. One quote that I really love is by Nathaniel Dett. So this is a composer I want you to write down. So Nathaniel Dett is essentially talking about everything we just discussed, which is kind of basically saying, what's the role of music? What's the role of music for certain types of people? So a long quote, but this is what he says. He says, we have this wonderful store of folk music, the melodies of an enslaved people. But this store will be of no value unless we utilize it, unless we treat it in such manner that can be presented in choral form, in lyric and operatic works, in concerti and suites and salon music. He says, unless our, meaning African-American, Black, unless our musical architects take the rough timbre of Negro themes and fashion from it, music, which will prove that we too have national feelings and characteristics, as have the European peoples whose forms we have zealously followed for so long. So that's a lot, right? But what is Nathaniel Dett saying? It's so important here. He's saying, just like Bach, when Zach plays these roaring, triumphant D major scales in both hands, and where he says, Zach is saying that sparks joy or brilliancy. I like to say triumph, where trumpet calls, right? It sparks some type of mood for Bach, and Bach wants to give the audience that mood. And Nathaniel Dett is saying Black people also share feelings. Black people also share so much history and culture that they too want to be able to use whatever said instrument or whatever said form, whether it's the opera, for us, it's the piano. How can we use our instrument to also contribute to what these feelings and emotions are, so that people can hear the voice of Black people, right? So this gets into a bit of a tricky area, and I'm sure some of you all have heard this back and forth, right? When we talk about Black Lives Matter, sometimes we always hear Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter, and then there's some people say, well, yeah, but it's because all lives matter, right? Have you guys kind of heard this back and forth? Sometimes it's like this, it's kind of like one person's on this end and another person's on this end, and it just kind of, people start battling it out, whether it's on social media or the news or whatever the platform, right? And no matter what side you're on, I want you to constantly think about this, kind of like the exercise we did at the very beginning when I asked you, name a composer as fast as you can, right? So even if you think, yes, all lives matter, what it's actually telling us when we just start spitting out facts as fast as we can, when we start listing Bach, Beethoven, and Brahms, and Fauré, and Liszt, and Chopin, and Rachmaninoff, right? It's saying that these are the names that have consistently been ingrained in our history. How? By the names that we constantly hear about, by the names that we constantly study, by the names that we constantly see in programs, right? And perhaps just by that evidence alone is shifting the narrative that, sure, we can say these Black names matter, but how come we're not listing them as quickly? How come we're not seeing them in the programs? How come your teachers are not giving you that music, right? So I want you to always be thinking about that. Or if you are in a dialogue with someone who's saying all lives matter, you can even use this example, right? So this is what I like to kind of start things with, which we've already talked about, is the fact that what I hope is that Bach, when we say Bach, Beethoven, and Brahms, that we can, alongside them, also have great emphasis on Bailey, on Bonds. The idea is that these big names, that other big names are also just as important. Does that make sense? So what exactly is activism? In a nutshell, I think the quickest and easiest way, it's simply making some type of change in society. Now, this can be a change in your school, right? If you don't like a rule that's in your school and you say, hey, I don't agree with that, I want to make a change about it. This could be something on a sports team. This, for us, it's the realm of classical music, but even more specifically, it's about our instrument, piano, right? Now, one of my favorite artists, the only reason I actually started piano is because I wanted to be Nina Simone. Now, Shane, do you know the name Nina Simone? Because I remember you saying that you do jazz. You do? Yeah. Can you tell me something about Nina Simone, or have you heard her music?
I know that she did Strange Fruit, I'm pretty sure.
Fantastic. Fantastic. I love her. Yes, I love her rendition of Strange Fruit. And for those of you who don't know, that's another name I want you to write down, Nina Simone. So my dad is a jazz bass player. So I grew up listening to jazz music, probably just like you, Shane, throughout my whole life. And my favorite voice, I always knew when Nina Simone was playing, because the timbre, the sound of her voice was so unique. And it just drew me in to start listening to her words. And her words were always so, so powerful, just like Strange Fruits, if you're not familiar with that song. And what I realized very early on, one, I always like to talk, if you haven't realized that. And I always love music. So I started thinking about how can I use this instrument here in order to share my voice with the world? And I feel like that's exactly what Nina Simone was doing. Nina Simone, like I said, I love quotes. She said, music should reflect the time of its people. And I have to tell each of you, I think we are living in an incredibly important, crucially important time, specifically for classical music. Because what we are coming to grips with in our country right now is that for too long, we have been listing Bach, Beethoven, Brahms, and Liszt, right? We've been putting so much emphasis on one category of classical music, classical piano music. And in all areas of the world, in all areas, all professions, we're starting to come to grips with, we also need to be including more voices. And I actually want to empower each of you to think of yourselves as activists, as advocates, to be able to create this type of shift and change with your music. And that's what I mean by this stage. Anytime you walk across the stage, I want you to think of it as an opportunity or a platform to create a change or to create some type of peaceful protest, okay? So what I want to do is share just a little bit about my journey. And then I want you all to start thinking about ways that you too, with your music, with your instrument, can start thinking about how you are an activist, whether you probably are, whether you know it or not, okay? So like I said, my dad was a jazz bass player, right? Or is a jazz bass player. So I always grew up listening to music. But he said, Leah, if you want to play piano, I want you to start with classical music. And the reason he said that is because he grew up only using his ear. So he has a fantastic ear. He can listen to anything on the piano and then just start playing it. Are any of you really good at that? What about you, Mason? Zach's shaking his head. Shane, you're saying yes. Mason, can you use your ear? Like, can you hear something and then kind of play it a bit? Not quite. So you really like having the music in front of you.
You have to read.
I'm the same way. I'm exactly the same way. So the reason is that my dad, like I said, he used his ear for everything. So it took him longer when he went back to start thinking about, okay, well, I really want to learn this craft, so I need to learn how to read music, right? So he wanted my sister and I to start with classical music because he thought, well, this will create a good foundation of learning to read, right? Unfortunately for me, I just kind of stuck with classical music. And I say unfortunately because I have such a great love for like what you do, Shane, which is jazz, being able just to sit at the piano and hear something and be able to improvise. But because I started with classical music and I never got to branch out, I became really in love with classical music and I was okay with that, right? But very early on, what I noticed is that when my parents started taking me to these concerts, and I'm sure that Joe can relate to this. Joe is a fantastic pianist as well. I started going to these concerts and I noticed very early on, I was the only Black person, or my family was the only Black person in the entire concert, right? Yet alone, definitely not a pianist on stage, but in as a whole audience member, we were always the only Black family. But, you just kind of come to terms with that. And I continued on and I went to Manhattan School of Music for my undergrad. And when I was at Manhattan School, I realized very quickly, I didn't have any teachers who looked like me. I had no Black teachers at Manhattan School of Music. And then I went to grad school at University of Michigan. And I was there for 6 years for my master's and my doctorate in a fellowship. And not a single Black student was enrolled in the classical music division as well, right? So I say all of this because what it constantly reminded me, one, yes, I was very isolated at times, but it also kind of made me start questioning, what is classical music and what is even my role in it? Do I have a voice? Do I have, honestly, the right to be in this space? because I simply didn't see it. Because of that question, and I want you all to constantly be thinking about questions of things that don't feel right to you and thinking about what you can do to make that change. Because I kept thinking about that constantly, it made me think about where I wanted to do my research, which ended up being piano music by Black composers. And I put this here, the research libraries, they really became a symbol of graveyards to me. By that, what I mean is that I went out to these, what we call these archival libraries, looking for music by Black composers. And early on, I didn't even think I would find that much. And what I did find was that there was so much music, so much music. And just like Nathaniel Dett said, the music is just not being utilized. It's a false understanding that there's no music out there. There's so much music out there. And why I say graveyard is because for me, it felt like these composers lived these incredible lives, just like we know everything about Bach, we know everything about Beethoven. Why don't we know everything about Florence Price? Why don't we know everything about Margaret Bonds? And why is their music just collecting dust, kind of like a graveyard in these libraries, right? So that's why I remember I said, think about that question, something that doesn't stir right with you. And then the moment you decide to do something about it, that's when I never thought of the term activism, but truly that's what my work was starting to become. The other turning point for me was when Freddie Gray was murdered in Baltimore. These murders, which have continuously been happening across the country, for whatever reason, Freddie Gray's really hit home for me because it was in Baltimore, and that's where my dad is from. That's where we would always go to for these great jazz concerts, right? So when it hit home for me, I really wanted to find ways where I can think about what can I do, right? What can I do in my community to make some type of difference? I knew that I could go out with my friends, right? And protest, do these peaceful protests and hold up signs and everything. And I did do that. But I wanted to find a way, what can I do with my instrument? Because I knew this was my gift. What can I do with my instrument to make that same type of impact? So these were the steps that I started looking at, and I want you to start thinking about this as well. First of all, because I felt so isolated, the first thing I wanted to do was create community. Community has always been so important the way that I grew up. And because I didn't have that as a student, sometimes you just have to make the change possible, right? So the first thing that I wanted to do, I told you I love teaching, and I wanted to teach, but I wanted to teach Black youth. That's where my heart was. So the first thing I wanted to do was reach out to a community that I was part of and start teaching them music. And I want to show you a quick video of a program that I had started. This is a community enrichment program where students from the Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti community can come to the University of Michigan School of Music, Theater, and Dance and learn the joy of music through piano. Are you not seeing it? Sorry, give me 1 second. I think I shared the wrong screen. Are you seeing this? Sorry about that. And this program is Our Own Thing instructional program and SMTD piano partnership. So this idea, it came to me during my master's, and I was working in Dr. Patterson's Our Own Thing program. And I saw this wonderful organization that had so many eager children participating.
The main problem with the lack of minority students in the musical programs in the Ann Arbor public school system was the fact that so many, or a large percentage of those students who were in the ensembles, orchestra particularly, were people whose parents had provided them with private lessons. And none of those kids had parents who could afford such, and so that was the reason for the creation of it.
Well, I've known Leah Claiborne for over 5 years now,
a little over 2 years ago, she came to me with this idea to partner with Our Own Thing. And that immediately excited me. It's a very special project and very close to all of us here at SMTD.
I knew I had my talents in teaching and piano. I loved Dr. Patterson's program that already had these really eager children wanting to learn. I wanted to have students that came through this program and they just love the arts, they love piano, because that's my passion.
So I'll stop there. So what you can see is that although my community, which was the University of Michigan, which is predominantly white institution where I was the only Black person studying classical music, what I had to do was just broaden my reach, right? I just looked for, where do I know my community exists, right? And then what I wanted to do was bring that community in to the university where I was. And what did this do? One, it created community for myself, which is I desperately, desperately needed, right? But then it also worked because I was working, on my research of piano music by Black composers. And what it allowed me to do was to teach this youth, the Black youth, the music of Black composers, right? So I say all this because when you start doing this type of looking around, what doesn't feel right? What doesn't sit right with me? What you'll start to see that happens, all of these little pieces about you come together to create your storyline, essentially. My storyline ended up being, I love teaching. I actually really love teaching all children, but I specifically love teaching Black youth. And then I realized I really love teaching all music, but I specifically love teaching piano music by Black composers to Black youth, because it really just started opening a whole new world, not only for the students, but also for the parents as well, right? Now I'm going to do that. The other thing that, along with community, was that I really wanted to start thinking about working alongside other Black musicians, right? Because we did this list of composers that we can spit out really quickly. But then I also think about, well, who's on the concert stage? Oftentimes it wasn't someone who looks like me. So that was another area that didn't sit well with me. So I thought, how can I start creating some type of change? So while I was there at my school, I just reached out to 2 other Black females, right? And I said, can we work together? Can we just start putting on concerts after concerts after concerts, performing music by Black composers, if we can, by Black females as well. So I started a small group. This is just a short excerpt of a video that we did. Are you seeing this? So I'll stop it right there. So, well, thank you. It's such good music, right? It's fun to play. And just like Zach was telling us, when we would go around the community and play this for many, many different types of audiences, and we would say, what do you feel when you listen to that? And I'm seeing you all, kind of bopping your heads and smiling. Just like Zach said, with his music, it brings him joy, right? or these D major triumphant, it just makes you want to smile. In the same way, this piece was by Samuel Coleridge Taylor. It was called My Lord Delivered Daniel. In the same way, this brings us joy, and hopefully it brought joy to our audiences as well, right? So going back to what Nathaniel Dett said, it was that we too, or Black people, have so many emotions and feelings and culture that is absolutely worth sharing, just like, you know, Zach's prelude and fugue in D major, right? So I want to wrap up with one other thing, and then I want to leave some time for questions and comments as well. Give me 1 second to pull this back up. Let me see. Don't want to leave. Are you still seeing my screen? No, that's what I thought. Let me share this. Here we go. Okay, so when you start thinking about what can you do, there will always be a little bit of pushback. And that's just because what you're trying to do is create some type of change. And if the pandemic has taught us anything, we don't like change. We don't like change with what has been the norm. And one quote, I told you I love quotes, I always think about is by Ruth Ginsburg. And she says, people ask me sometimes, when will there be enough women on the court? So she was a Supreme Court justice, right? And she said her answer was, when there are 9. So there are 9 Supreme Court justices always, right? And her response is, I'm going to keep going until it's normal that there are 9 women, and it's not the exception that at the time when she was the only woman, right? And I say this because I constantly had to think about that when people say, you know, Leah, why you only do programs by Black composers? Or why are you only doing it this way? Sometimes there's a lot of pushback with that. And I say, well, sometimes I don't just do all, you know, programs by Black composers, but even so, why is that such an issue, right? Why do you have such a problem when concerts have always been Bach, Beethoven, and Brahms, and no one thought twice about it? But somehow by me doing the opposite, then it becomes a problem, right? So I say this by saying, whatever stirs you and you start wanting to create these type of changes, don't just know that you will probably have some type of pushback, and that's okay. It's absolutely okay. And that probably will tell you you're doing the right thing, because you're creating some type of change within your, you know, within this area of classical music. Another thing, which I said before, you are part of this narrative of creating change in classical music. One thing that you can also do, along with programming music by Black composers, or any other composer, really, right? It doesn't have to be Bach, Beethoven, Brahms. If there is, you know, Chinese music or music by females, or Indonesian music, right? All of these other voices that we just don't hear, simply by you choosing that music to learn and to study, you too are becoming an activist. And then what I always tell my students, you have to compete with the music, right? Because now what you're doing, you're taking it a step further. It's one thing to program the music and do recitals, and that's fantastic. The moment you choose to compete with it, you're actually giving a teachable moment to your judge. And by that, I mean, now you're telling your judge, you need to think critically about this music in the same way that you're thinking critically about me playing this Bach prelude, right? So you are still becoming this advocate, even as a student, by how you're choosing to showcase your music. And then another thing that I always say is that invite people to anything that you're doing, whether it's a recital or a concert that you're doing at your school, whether you're playing, you know, at a church function, whether you do something for your sport. The more people, the more community, the more arms that you can link with other people, you are still becoming an activist by exposing them to what they might not even know exists, but it's also breaking down some walls of some preconceived notions that they may have about classical music. So then finally, I just leave it with, what is your story, right? We all have a specific story and journey that is so worth listening to. And every time that you come to the piano, your instrument, I want you to think of your instrument as a way, actually as a voice. It's an instrument to share your story with other people. And the more that you understand yourself, the more you understand this journey, you are also an activist and you're becoming an advocate by using the instrument in that way. I hope this was helpful for you all, and I'd love to take some time and just maybe answer some questions or some concerns or really any comments at all.
I have a question,
Sure.
Dr. Claiborne. Well, so as a daughter of Asian immigrants in the Midwest, I spent a lot of time, most of my time, with nobody that looked like me. And I am turned into an extrovert, but I spent a lot of my developing years wanting to blend in. And so it was really hard for me to find my voice later. And I'm just wondering if you were always, had this personality of wanting to share, or was there a turning point? And also what advice you might have for somebody who is like just figuring out their story, like how to put themselves out there.
Yeah, it's a great question. Let me answer the first one. The last one. What would I share with someone who's just learning, right? I have to tell everyone, I always say, you can never rush experience, right? And I say that because if I look at myself, like 12-year-old Leah, or even 15-year-old Leah, even last year Leah, in many ways, right? I'm constantly growing. We're all constantly changing, right? So 15-year-old Leah, I was obsessed, truly obsessed with Rachmaninoff when I was in high school, right? But what did that tell me? It told me that I have a love for romanticism, romantic music. I also had a love for Russian music, but why? Because I loved this idea of nationalistic music. So although I didn't have the tools or the experiences yet to even think about music by Black composers, it all creates the same type of thread of this quilt, right, that I'm making, which is because I was so obsessed with this composer that represented a Russian sound. Later down the road, when I started really internalizing a lot of hardships as being a Black person in this country and a Black person in classical music, I look back to that obsession with Rachmaninoff, and I think, well, just like Nathaniel Dett, what does it mean to be Black? What is a Black sound? Does that exist? What is American sound? Does that exist? So all of these things, it takes time to build, right? But every step of the way is so important to the journey. And your other question was, have I always felt, what was the first part again?
Did you always have this passion that was like already there, and it just through experience came out, or did you learn it?
I think it was always there because family has always been so important to me. And I think the reason I say family is because for me, I learned everything about culture through family, because I wasn't seeing that in the passion that I chose in classical music, right? And I think we tend to model what we are taught, right? And that's good in that. We can model only being taught, Bach, Beethoven, Brahms, but then this other side of me, which I got from my family, was empowerment of Black culture, right? My grandmother actually just received an award in Juneteenth for being the first African-American female to own a business in her town, right? She's 91 years old, which is not that long ago, right? So it's kind of like this duality that I always felt, right? Being in these white spaces, but at the same time, within my family, constantly reminding me of the celebration of Black culture. So I guess you can say it was always together. it's opposite but together, but I always grew up being very, very aware of that. And I think that's what sparked that type of drive, because when I was in certain spaces, I was very aware, like, 1 second, I'm not seeing representation. I'm not seeing the celebration that I was brought up to recognize. Yeah. Do
Any other
yeah. Questions, or if you're thinking, really anything. I see you thinking about something.
Yeah. Well, thank you for doing this.
Of course, it's my pleasure.
Yeah.
And hopefully it gives you all something to think about. Whatever your passion or your challenge may be, to want to try to improve the world and your own community in your own part of the world. I want to thank Dr. Claiborne for speaking so beautifully today about her life's work so far. And it's been such an inspiration what she's been able to accomplish and achieve and help. And I noticed that she's listed her email account or address here. So if you have any questions for her, please feel free to email her. She is so special and so articulate and such a doer. And I think that's really important in these times, especially in this past year when so much has happened in the United States and there's growing awareness of inequality and perhaps unfairness and in the way that we look at things. And we truly need all of us to share and to help each other appreciate all individuals, and Black Lives Matter. They do. And go ahead, Zach.
I guess, like, what exactly would make, I mean, it's kind of making me think now, like, now I'm rethinking my question. My original question was, like, what makes, like, a composer, like a classical composer, like, versus someone who's just borrowing, like, classical elements? I guess I never really thought of that for, like, well, you wouldn't really ask, like, oh, is, like, Bach, like, really a classical like, of course Bach's a classical composer, but then, like, I guess I don't know why I'm asking these kind of questions for, like, all of the, like, these new like the Black composers that we're talking about today. So maybe I don't know if I'm just, like, putting up double standards. It's probably what's happening in my head.
Yeah, I mean, Zach, I think that's the right question to ask, right? What is a classical composer, right? How are we choosing to define classical music? And what I always tell people to do is think about all of your composers who you study, and then also think about, like, these names, Nathaniel Dett or Margaret Bonds, or Samuel Coleridge Taylor, and keep listening. I always encourage all of my students, keep listening to music, because what you'll find is that there are so many similarities, for one, right? So many of these composers are using folk tunes for their culture, and they're putting it on the piano as a sonata, or they're writing an opera, or they're doing chamber music, like we saw with my trio, right? So they're choosing all these different forms, and they're just putting their voice upon it. And that's truly, I mean, that's music, and that's what classical music is. And I want to commend you, because those are the type of questions you want to keep thinking about, because it starts redefining your approach of these big pictures of, like, what is classical music.
Thank you, Dr. Claiborne.
Do you have any other names you want to drop?
Yes. I should have just made a list here. So we have, what would be a good way? Could I create, like, a list for you all? And Dr. Chang, would it be possible if I made, like, a listening list
Yeah.
to share it with the students?
Yes, absolutely. We have all of their email addresses. If you registered at the Pixical website, we have your email address. Zach, did you register there? And Mason as well? Okay.
Perfect. Yeah, I have
Good.
this listening list
Great.
that I'd love to give out, and I'll send that to you all.
Great. So thank you so much to all our participants today. I just wanted to point out in the next couple of weeks, we have additional free workshops on piano skills. Mika Sasaki from Juilliard is going to conduct a workshop of melodic explorations. And then we have Jose Ramos Santana, who is going to come and speak to us about exploring Spanish and Latin American music at the piano. So if anything interests you, check the website and register for your seat. And thank you again all for attending today. And I wish you and we wish you all well.
Thank you so much. So nice talking with you all.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Thank you so
Bye,
much.
Shane.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, Mason. Bye, Zach.